In Dead by Daylight, through the many nerfs, there are times where a perk or killer gets buffed to be meta-defining and incredibly strong, skyrocketing them from F tier all the way up to S tier and being game-changing. So in today's video, let's talk about the biggest buffs in Dead by Daylight history. Now, this isn't talking about broken perks or killers right now in the game, because some of these perks on the list have been changed over time and nerfed to be now in a more reasonable spot. But let's start with the biggest buffs we've ever seen, starting with number 10, Hex Ruin. Ruin is one of Dead by Daylight's oldest perks, and as of now, it's not in a good spot really, but back then, it was one of the best regression perks in the whole game. In Ruin's first iteration, it was infamous because every time you hit a good skill check, you would lose progress and would have to hit a great skill check in order to not lose progress. This meant that you either had to be a master at hitting skill checks or do something known as gen tapping, where instead of continuously working on a generator, you would tap the generator to get a little bit of progress, but a short enough amount of time to not trigger a skill check. A lot of new players did not like this perk at all because it needed you to hit great skill checks in order to progress the game. So they reworked Ruin to be what was in a not as strong state, supposedly a weaker state, by making it now so that whenever a generator is not being worked on, it would regress at 200% speed. Currently, it only regresses at 100%, making it much more decent and playable to go against, but back then during that meta, you'd basically always see Hex Ruin paired with either Pop or Undying basically every game because of how perfect this perk was. Everyone back then said it was going to be a nerf to original Ruin, but now in retrospect, Hex Ruin was one of the most balanced perks in the entire game since it was, again, a Hex Totem. It could be removed as soon as the match starts. Now, however, like I mentioned, Ruin has been ruined so much that it doesn't see much play, but it's still in a decent spot after they threw it a bone. Next at number 9 is Lethal Pursuer. Now, this is going to be a strange choice, but stick with me here. Lethal Pursuer got a buff to not only its initial time, which was already pretty good, but got one of the strongest passive buffs in the entire game. That being that any and all aura reading effects become extended. There is basically no other effect like this in the entire game other than I think like one add-on with Onryo with Undetectable I think, but that's about it. Since Lethal now buffs everything from powers, add-ons, and perks, it becomes a staple in basically any aura reading build. It was already a good perk back then that would let you quickly start off the game, but with his buff, it could be basically used in any build where you want to be able to see people's auras. It was already a good perk back then, but with the buff, if you want to use anything that reveals auras, this just becomes a perk that buffs everything. You can use like barbecue and chili or gearhead or add-ons that reveal auras and they all become better. Like with this singularity or this plague add-on, if you use Lethal Pursuer, these add-ons become even better. You might say that it shouldn't be on the list, but be honest, there is no other perk in the game that makes auras last longer and can buff an entire genre of perks. Sure, there is open-handed for the survivors that buffs the range of aura reading perks, but not the duration, and duration is way more important to killers. Number 8 is Hope. Hope has always been a perk that you may not always get value out of, but when you do, oh boy do you feel it. There were two versions of Hope before we got our current version. The first one was that it gave a smaller buff, but it was permanent. Then there was a second one that gave a huge haste buff, but it was on a timer. So Behavior decided in 6.1.0 to just fuse them together, giving literally the best of both worlds, a 7% speed boost that lasts forever. With New Hope, once you get to endgame, you basically never have to worry about being caught with that speed boost. Those moments where the whole team needs to heal and team up to get the last unhook becomes 100 times easier when you move so much faster that the killer basically needs to take twice as long to catch up to you, and if you're the last one who gets unhooked, well, you just can't be caught. Hope is such a great perk to use, but I get why some people don't want to run it and would rather run something more consistent like Lithe or Sprint Burst, because those you'd always get value out of, and Hope you don't always get value out of. At number 7, we have a perk that is actually pretty good still right now, and that's Coup de Grace. Coup was already a pretty good perk that just needed a little something to become great, and by simply giving it 2 stacks per gen completed, it literally makes the perk twice as good. Coup makes it so that you basically have a lunge that's twice as long, and in most loops, that's basically a guaranteed hit. So what would happen then if you double the amount of these extended lunges you get? Well, you get current Coup de Grace, which a lot of people have problems with. This perk is pretty controversial because with Coup, it basically makes every loop unsafe, but I see it as somewhat balanced since the generator does need to be completed for it to happen anyways. On to number 6, and that is Off the Record. Off the Record used to be a pretty mediocre, underwhelming anti-tunneling perk, because if the killer is right there watching you get unhooked, what's the point of being silent or immune to aura reading if they can already see you get unhooked? However, in 6.1.0, they buffed it to give it a whopping 80 seconds of endurance along with the other effect. Once that happened, it quickly became one of the best anti-tunneling perks in the entire game and just overall best perks in the whole game. 80 seconds of endurance isn't the same as being healthy, since endurance can make you health gate through being exposed or hit with instant downs like chainsaw, making it so that you can get hit with a chainsaw to the face and still walk away. Basically, for 80 whole seconds, you don't have to worry about anything, because if the killer tries chasing you, they'd be wasting so much time with that endurance status effect. There's not really much else to say other than with this one tiny change, the perk became really good, which is a common thing. However, now we start getting to the really busted perks, starting with number 5, Distortion. Distortion is a perk we all know very well by now that makes you immune to aura reading perks. When Distortion first released, it was pretty bad. You started off with only a couple of tokens that could be quickly burned through and you had no way to replenish them. However, again, in 6.1.0, they buffed Distortion to recharge stacks over time while you're in the killer's tear radius, making it so you can basically be immune to aura reading perks through the whole match. Unless the killer brings some sort of perk or add-on that can quickly burn through tokens, if you're using only one aura reading perk like Barbecue or Floods of Rage, you basically never get to see that perk being used. Distortion as of now is one of the best perks in the game because the only way to counter it is to either spam aura reading perks that eat stacks faster than they can be replenished like with Gearhead, or you play a killer who can hide their tear radius or give them Oblivious so they're not in the tear radius generating stacks. But if you want to play something like Billy with Barbecue and Chili so you can get into another chase faster, or Pyramid Head with I'm All Ears so you can land your shots, well, if they have Distortion, you never get to use those perks. Same thing with Lethal Pursuer, you just don't ever get to use these perks once in the match. Number 4 is Grim Embrace. How Grim Embrace used to work is that once you have all 4 survivors hooked for the first time, all generators would be blocked for 40 seconds and you would see the Obsession's aura for 6 seconds. However, in 7.5.0, they changed this, so now that the first time each survivor is hooked, all generators will be blocked by 12 seconds, along with the massive 40-second stall at all 4 stacks. Grim Embrace was really bad back then, because another generator blocking perk was just objectively better, that being Deadlock, which would trigger more times throughout the match, 4 times in total, giving you about 2 minutes of gen blocking constantly, and giving you information on which generator you need to defend, since it would always defend the one with most progress, versus Grim Embrace, which only triggered once when you finally hooked the final survivor. Sure, stopping all progress for 40 seconds is a pretty good ability, but it's only one time after winning a chase against every survivor, which made it not really worth it. After the buff, however, now it gives 70 seconds of complete game shutdown in total, which makes it so much stronger and more consistent to use. This perk went from D tier to an easy S tier perk. Next is number 3, and that is Hillbilly. Yes, it's not just perks, I said killers too, go watch that part back at the beginning. It's just that no other killer has gotten a rework as good as Hillbilly's. For a long period of time, Hillbilly was considered one of the best killers in the game. He was fast and had an amazing chase ability that could instantly down survivors. He was simple at a glance, but people who mastered him could master curves, and knowing how to make every loop unsafe is what made him so good. For years, he went completely unchanged as the general consensus was that he was balanced. Nobody really wanted him nerfed, everyone liked him. However, in 4.1.0, Hillbilly was randomly assassinated and hit with one of the worst reworks in the entire game's history, making it now so that when you use his saw for too long, it would go into overheat, making it so that you couldn't use it for a long period of time. People were outraged over this change because literally nobody really wanted a Hillbilly nerf. He was hard to play and master and nowhere near as busted as some of the other killers at the time like Nurse, Blight, or Spirit, yet he was still hit with this massive nerf. For years, nobody liked playing Hillbilly because of this nerf. It was such a massive detrimental change to his kit that just nobody wanted to play him. They tried tweaking it over and over, time and time again, to make it easier to manage, generating heat slower and going away faster, but it still wasn't enough. And after all of these buffs to make the heat generation easier to maintain and easier to get rid of, they just gave up because nobody wanted to play him, and we got this new version of Hillbilly, and it is insane. In patch 7.5.0, Hillbilly was back with a vengeance. Now, instead of overheating, he used that heat to run and charge even faster. Instead of being punished by using his saw too much, you are now buffed. Moving faster, charging faster, and recovering from hits faster. Billy now moves at hypersonic speeds, but more importantly, he can use his saw as much as he wants, which is what everyone wanted. Now Hillbilly's in a great spot and often said to be a top 5 killer because of this second rework. In second place, we have Buckle Up, one of the most controversial perks in recent times. Buckle Up used to be one of the worst and most redundant perks in all of Dead by Daylight. It used to work that you could see a downed survivor's aura more intensely if you were close enough to them. Basically, you could see them be more red depending on how much they've recovered, but that was still really useless, and when you picked up a downed survivor, both of you would be able to see the killer's aura. It was useless because you already wanted to go pick up survivors if they were being slugged, so being able to see that they were slightly brighter, meaning that they were at 99, was useless. It was useless. If you wanted an aura reading perk on the killer, there are so many better options other than this. Not to mention that eventually the survivor HUD was implemented to the game, making it so you could literally just see on the left how far along they've recovered with a bar, making Buckle Up's ability to see your aura based off recovery less than useless. However, in patch 7.1.0, behavior unleashed a true monster to the game. Now, when you picked up a survivor who was downed, both of you gain the endurance status effect for 10 seconds, both of you. This was like old borrowed time, where unhooking a survivor gave both players enduring, but now it's with picking up survivors, and that of course is way too strong. This of course was not all. When paired with the perk For the People, this literally let survivors get instantly revived faster than the killer could do anything about it, and since they both have enduring, that meant that no matter who the killer goes for, both survivors can use that enduring to get to a safe area because there's nothing the killer can do. This perk was, well, to say it the least, completely uncounterable. All the survivor had to do was run in, press a button, and both of them got out of jail for free. If you go for the survivor that's downed, they have enduring. If you go for the person who just wasted a health state, guess what? They also have enduring. No matter what you did, it was always a lose-lose scenario with zero counterplay. There was nothing you could do. There is only like maybe one possible counterplay, and that's bring Save the Best for last, because maybe then you could, wipe your weapon faster than they could get picked up. But that's it. If you didn't bring Save the Best for last, it was uncounterable. There was nothing you could do to stop them from running in, pressing the insta-heal button, and both of them getting away for free. Now, however, they have luckily nerfed it to give only a 50% haste speed boost to the person who's picked up, so it's not as stupid anymore. Now, before we get to the biggest literal game-changing buff we have ever seen in Dead by Daylight's history, let me list some honorable mentions: Windows of Opportunity and Background Player. Windows was buffed so that it no longer has a cooldown on it whenever you vault something, but I mean, it still is the same perk overall. It still shows you where to run next, what pallets are there, what windows are there, etc, etc. Yes, it is the #1 most used perk in the entire game, but I mean, the buff didn't really change anything about the perk itself. It's still the exact same thing. It only just doesn't have a cooldown now. And next up is Background Player, which is still probably the most controversial perk in the game right now, because with it, you can't ever pick up a survivor if someone has this perk. So why isn't it on the list then? Well, because Background Player was always strong at 150% speed. An on-demand sprint burst to pick up survivors was always good, but people didn't start using it until the 200% speed boost, making it so that you could move faster than Adrenaline for some reason. I didn't put it on the list because it still is a good perk right now, it's just that people didn't realize it yet. And it still is good at 150% speed like it is now and was before, it's just that the buff gave it a spotlight. Again, I could see people putting these on their list, for how strong they are now, but I'm just not putting them on because Windows, still basically the same thing, still strong, doesn't have a cooldown. Background Player, still strong, even, after the 50% nerf, moving it back down to 150%, so technically, it was strong, just as strong back then. That's why I'm not putting them on the list. However, these two perks still do not compare to the #1 perk. If you've played Dead by Daylight for a long time now, you will know this perk and remember how evil it was. This perk defined the game for months and created an entire meta with the most evil, most hated killers. This perk strikes fear into those who had to live with it. That is Eruption. The Gen Kick meta by far was objectively the strongest meta the game has ever seen, no questions asked, and Eruption was the biggest player in this meta. Eruption used to work that when you kicked a gen, it was armed. Once a survivor goes down, it would explode and regress a tiny bit. Nothing insane so far. However, if a survivor was on the generator while it exploded, they would become incapacitated for 16 seconds. What that means is that for 16 seconds, that survivor cannot do anything. For 16 seconds, they couldn't do anything. Eruption had a very low pick rate, so what did they do? They buffed it in patch 6.1.0, making it a whopping 25-second incapacitation. For 25 seconds, you cannot do anything. This led to the most toxic, most boring, most annoying, and not to mention strongest meta the game has ever seen. When it was paired with two other perks, Call of Brine and Overcharge, you would not only mark the gen to explode, but make it regress at 300% speed. And if a survivor was unlucky enough to be on that gen when you downed someone, boom, they're out of the game for half a minute. Even in Survive with Friends, the counterplay was abysmal. Every time a survivor is about to go down, basically everyone has to stop working on a generator or risk being put out of the game for, 25 seconds. So they just had to stand there for 5 to 10 seconds, waiting until that survivor who's getting chased calls out that they're getting down. Then once they're down and see it explodes, then they continue working on the gen. Of course, this was also paired with the most hated killers in the game's history, that being Knight and Skull Merchant, who could kick a gen and have it defended for long periods of time, eating away massive amounts of progress in seconds with that 300% regression speed. Eruption made it so that just by playing the objective and doing gens, when a teammate goes down and messes up, you just can't play the game for 25 whole seconds. You can't do generators, you can't even heal a teammate. You just have to sit there and watch a generator while your debuff timer slowly ticks down. Now, however, in the current era, Eruption is dead. It's not good. It's very bad. And now that the whole 3-gen change went through, making it so you can only damage a generator 8 times, this basically killed Eruption, since you have to kick a generator and then it explodes. That means you basically only get to use it 4 times. This perk will just never be good again because of that change. So that's my top 10 biggest buffs in Dead by Daylight history. I know the order for the first 4 may be a little weird, but it was hard to do considering how close these buffs were in relative power and could definitely be shifted around a little bit. But I am 100% confident on the top 3's placement. I did want to include more killers on the list, but I mean, none of them have really gotten buffs as big as Hillbilly. Trickster's rework was pretty decent, Twin's rework got deleted, and Freddy's rework is, well, it's Freddy. Let me know what your favorite buff is in the comment, and I'll see you all next time. Take care of yourselves and have a damn good one. Peace!